also be a weakness above the gray fog, in the palace that was held up by stone columns. Derek quickly repeated his encounter to Mr. Fool. Dark Angel Sasrir. The names and titles of these kings of angels seem to have been washed away by the rivers of history. Almost no one knows of them. If it weren't for Little Sun discovering them in the forsaken land of the gods, or me directly encountering the ancient evil spirit suspected to be Red Angel himself, I might not even know a single king of angels. At best I would have heard of the Ammon family, and would have no way of delving deeper into the blasphemer. Where is this dark angel at present? Is he still alive? Is he still one of the upper echelons of the Rose Redemption? Klein felt wistful. Afraid that Little Sun would ask him related questions that he couldn't answer, Klein instantly stopped his contemplations and leisurely leaned back into the chair and said, "You have been freed from your predicament. Your companions will soon find you." As he spoke, he didn't give Little Sun a chance to speak by directly cutting off the connection. As for an explanation in the event that Little Sun was discovered to be abnormal, Klein disdained the thought of reminding him to fabricate an explanation. Mysteriously disappear and then appear again. Wasn't it very normal that all sorts of strange scenarios accompanied? At that moment, Derek was very grateful that Mr. Fool didn't ask him any further questions. This was because he was afraid that he would be exposed to the lethal darkness or hidden monsters once he escaped the alternate afternoon town. Therefore, he was eagerly hoping to regain control of his body as soon as possible, so as to prepare the necessary precaution. However, if Mr. Fool had really asked a question, he would still seriously and very patiently explain the corresponding situation. With his consciousness returning to his body, Derek rapidly recovered his senses. When he opened his eyes, he saw a candle which was almost done burning. The wick's flame was wavering in the wind. Immediately after that, he discovered that the chief was standing to his side at some point in time. The tall Haim and the red-gloved Joshua were warily standing 2 steps behind. How long have they been watching me like that? Although Derek had already thought of a reason above the gray fog, he still felt guilty and nervous. Colin's wrinkled face was deadpan. He asked in a normal tone as he looked at Derek Berg, "What did you encounter?" Derek didn't immediately answer, as it would appear as though he had already fabricated an excuse. He used a trick taught by the hanged man. He deliberately paused for a few seconds, and as he recalled, he described while recalling the events in a rather staccato manner. "I saw the altar after entering the underground chamber. I suspected that it was an altar, and tried to identify the remnant words and symbols on it. I recognized 3 names. One of them was Angel of Fate Arabaros. At this point, the light from the lantern extinguished. When I turned my head to look, Haim and Joshua had vanished. I created a light source and walked out of the underground chamber and discovered that the outside was still afternoon town. However, many of the buildings had candles lit inside them as though humans were living in them. T didn't dare to leave the building, and I returned to the underground chamber. I attempted to do what I did again. Chief, in that afternoon town, the words on the altar were very complete. There were a total of 3 languages. One was Jotun, the other Dragonese, and another I didn't recognize. However, the first 2 languages expressed the same word. They were the names and titles of the 3 angels, as well as Rose Redemption. Later, I found myself back here. What he said was the truth, and it was very complete. All he did was hide the details of how he returned." Derek didn't have any hopes of successfully lying to the chief. He planned on being confused when he was pressed, pushing the reasons onto the abnormality of his body that he didn't understand. This will definitely make the chief suspicious, but Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice from the Spectator Pathway all said that he wouldn't ask too many questions regarding such matter. By appearing abnormal, will he think more importantly of me? I will be viewed as a chess piece that can counterbalance Elder Lovia. The outside world sure is complicated. It was only recently that I fully understood their train of thought. Derek couldn't help but sigh inwardly. In a dire environment, the depletion of every ounce of strength would mean more danger for the City of Silver. It had very few instances in the past. And even if it happened, it was basically concentrated within the 6-member council. The first thing the other Beyonders learned in their patrols and adventuring was cooperation. Colin nodded gently, walked to the altar, and attempted what Derek described, but he didn't disappear as a result of this. He remained standing in his original spot. "From the looks of it, the remnant powers have already completed their mission," the demon hunter muttered softly to himself. I didn't even need to fabricate an excuse, Derek thought, feeling somewhat embarrassed. Colin thought for a moment before turning his head to look at Derek. What are the corresponding titles of Medici and Sasria? Red Angel and Dark Angel. Derek was honest. Colin nodded gently, seemingly in thought. In a small number of books, there is mention of a Red Angel, but with no actual name associated with it. As for Dark Angel Sasria, he has completely been lost to history. Derek was just about to take the opportunity to ask about the other kings of angels when he suddenly noticed that the candlelight in the underground chamber had dimmed, as though a shadow was surging in from outside. Let's leave this place for now, Demon Hunter Colin said cautiously, having sensed the same thing. With the axe of Hurricane in hand, Derek immediately approached Haim and Joshua to form a battle formation with them. However, just as he took one step, he discovered that Haim had retreated 2 meters to the side. Joshua had raised his left red-gloved hand. Both of them didn't hide their wariness, as their eyes keenly observed him. Derek knew that this was a very normal reaction from them. This was because lessons regarding explorations had the corresponding teaching. Be observant and make less contact with companions who had just escaped a strange situation. And I haven't clearly explained how I escaped that strange afternoon town. Derek opened his mouth in a bid to explain, but he closed his mouth in silence again. He felt ashamed and aggrieved as he pursed his lips. Holding the axe of Hurricane, he turned and followed the chief, taking one step at a time before leaving the underground chamber. The quartet soon arrived at the entrance and was prepared to leave. To their surprise, they realized that the afternoon town with shadows cloaking its buildings had appeared to have darkened a little. Almost instantaneously, there was candlelight shining out from different windows from different buildings. The dim yellowish lights were either connected or disconnected, silent and heavy. Klein didn't stay too long above the gray fog. He quickly returned to the bathroom and put away the corresponding items. Let's hope that there wouldn't be any more incidents on Little Sun's side. It wouldn't be too good for me to repeatedly enter the bathroom. People in the know will realize that I'm hiding a secret, but those not in the know would definitely think that J.M. and Sparrow has a bladder problem. It would be a tarnish on my persona. Although I've already digested the faceless potion, Nimble Right Master Risego went from one sequence to the next. The Beyonder characteristic he left behind obviously contains a set of the faceless potion. Using this Beyonder characteristic as a main ingredient is equivalent to me drinking an additional faceless, magician, clown, and seer potion, or even more. I should still try my best to abide by the various principles I previously concluded, so as to digest the excess portion. Klein made some clean water and washed his face before walking out of the bathroom. Just as he was wondering if it was almost time for dinner, and was planning to take out his golden pocket watch to take a look, the scene before his eyes suddenly turned black. He could hardly see his fingers. It's night again, the intervals don't follow a pattern. If we encounter a monster and both sides are in an intense battle, what happens when the sky suddenly turns dark? Monsters are also creatures, so they need to sleep as well, otherwise, there's a high chance that they will disappear into the night. Heh heh. Both parties in combat have to lie down and sleep, only to continue when they wake up. Is this really a story that can pass the censor? Klein, who had relaxed after successfully advancing, lampooned as he quickly walked to his bed. Just as he got in bed, he suddenly thought of a problem. The night here is very dangerous. If living creatures do not sleep, they will vanish completely. The darkness of the forsaken land of the gods, including the city of Silver, is similarly dangerous. If there's no light to disperse the darkness, humans would completely vanish if the darkness exceeds 5 seconds. It's really similar. Could there really be some connection here? Klein shook his head and with cogitation entered a dream. Amidst the dream, he realized that he had switched locations again once he became lucid. The last time he left the dream, he was on the boulder where Admiral of Stars Catlia was sitting as she hugged her knee. This time he was facing a staircase. The light of the sunset shined through the colored glass panes high above, making the black spiraling staircase, adorned with sculptures, look exceedingly beautiful. Klein instinctively looked to the side and found Queen Mystic standing high up the staircase. This long chestnut-haired lady wasn't wearing her dress with open hem. Her top was a white shirt with lace and flowery bands, matched with a simple dark blue coat. Her lower half was still the beige-colored trousers with black leather boots. However, Klein believed that Queen Mystic probably had an entire wardrobe, or even a room full of trousers and leather boots of the same style. What's the matter? Klein took the initiative to ask. Queen Mystic caressed the handrail with her right hand as she slowly walked down. Confidence might be a weakness at times. You trust that copper whistle and paper crane of yours too much. Perhaps one day it will be the source of danger. Klein felt a little uneasy at that, but he didn't show it. Don't understand what you mean. Confidence might be a weakness at times, Queen Mystic repeated again. Katlia trusts the sealed artifact she gave Heath Dole too much. If I hadn't boarded the ship, then Nina, Frank Lee, and her would have died. But you might survive. That sealed artifact isn't actually able to block the ravings that fill these waters. That's how Heath Dole mutated. Klein acutely read in between the lines. Queen Mystic nodded. Under ordinary circumstances, it can. But do you know who the ravings that fill these waters come from? Without waiting for Klein's reply, she gave the answer. The true creator. Information: the true creator. The ravings that fill these waters come from the true creator. Upon hearing Queen Mystic's answer, Klein was surprised while feeling somewhat joyful. He was rejoicing because, just as Queen Mystic said, if she hadn't boarded the ship, Heath Doyle might have undergone a mutation even with the existence of a sealed artifact which could reduce his auditory senses to a certain effect. Towards low and mid-sequence beyonders of other pathways, they would only feel repressed and frustrated, or they would occasionally suffer from nightmares when faced with the true creator's ravings without actually listening to them. But to a Rose Bishop, the sequence 0 for his corresponding pathway was the true creator. To be immersed in the ravings of this evil god, even if he was deaf, something would have happened to him sooner or later. Once Heath Doyle went mad or lost control, together with the uniqueness of these waters, it was truly difficult for the rest of the people on board the ship to be safe. However, Klein believed that as long as he could survive the sudden attack, he would have the chance to pray to the Fool and use the sea god scepter above the gray fog to provide a response to resolve the problem. He was surprised that the owner of the ravings was in complete contradiction with his theory. He originally imagined that these waters were the battlefield between the ancient gods and the Creator, worshipped by the City of Silver during the Second Epoch. He suspected that the subsidiary gods, who were also the corresponding angels, had participated in it as well. To his surprise, this appeared to be wrong from the beginning. This was because the true Creator had apparently first appeared after the Third Epoch's cataclysm. I cannot rule out the possibility that the ravings were later left behind. Klein didn't blindly make a conclusion. He watched as Queen Mystic walked past him as she caressed the sculptures on the handrail and slowly walked down. The lady's back was tall, neither fat nor thin. Her figure was extremely proportioned, and her long chestnut hair simply cascaded down. This made Klein feel a sense of familiarity. After recalling the matters involving Queen Mystic, he finally recalled the source of the familiarity. Back when he was searching for the cards of blasphemy at the Roselle Memorial Exhibition, he had seen a similar back. Back then, the figure dressed somewhat oddly. Despite wearing a yellow layered dress which had the vibes of a young girl, she wore a black, out-of fashion bonnet. She was likely Queen Mystic. He had also visited the Roselle Memorial Exhibition ahead of time. Back then, she was looking at the basic education books the Emperor had improved for his children, and the Chinese chess and toy blocks. She was certain that I had taken the Black Emperor card. The Emperor's eldest daughter, Bernadette, established the element Dawn to resist the Moses ascetic order. And from the diary, that lady appreciates the maxim, do as you wish but do no harm. Therefore, from these 2 points, it can be inferred that she's likely a demigod of the Mystery Prior Pathway. The Mystery Prior Pathway Sequence 4 is Mysticologist, Queen Mystic. Of course, the reputation of Queen Mystic has long been known across the seas for more than 100 years. She's definitely not a Sequence 4 anymore. Yes, after Katlia left Queen Mystic, she joined the Moses ascetic order. This queen seems to take the interpretation of Roselle's diary very seriously. All sorts of fragmented pieces of information came together as Klein suddenly had a theory. Perhaps Queen Mystic was Emperor Roselle's eldest daughter, Bernadette Gustave. This might explain why this queen dresses in the style that resembles Earth's, but also appears rather strange. She has been deeply influenced by the Emperor's preferences, and she's unable to completely extricate herself from the fashion trend. Hence, she mixes them into a unique and strange style she can call her own. As for it being aesthetically pleasing, that's a whole other matter. A beautiful person will look good and fashionable even with a gunny sack, Klein lampooned inwardly, but he wore a solemn expression. He unhurriedly followed Queen Mystic down the beautiful staircase. Queen Mystic didn't turn her head. As she walked, she said, "This dream world isn't vast. There are only two parts. One of them is the shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite mountain, and the other is the black cloister over here." Giant King's Court. A majestic building complex that seemed frozen in the sunset surfaced in Klein's mind. This is actually the shadow of the Giant King's Court. And Little Sun and company happened to be at the entrance of the Giant King's Court, Afternoon Town. Queen Mystic said with a gentle but emotionless tone, "This is my theory, as it resembles the great Twilight Hall in Faceac. And in the fourth epoch, there has always been rumors that the god of combat is an ancient giant who survived the cataclysm. The god of combat pathway is the giant pathway." Klein inwardly expressed his agreement with Queen Mystic's theory. At that moment, he recalled the mythical information he had received from Little Sun. He realized that the description of the Giant King's Court being forever residing in the sunset matched the spectacle of the opposite mountain. From the true creator to the Giant King's Court, she has revealed two extremely valuable pieces of information. She's expressing her goodwill to me, no, the entity backing me. Heh, and the person backing me is myself, Klein calmly replied. The real Giant King's Court is in the forsaken land of the gods. He said this matter in an indifferent tone, so as to accentuate his value and the entity backing it. Queen Mystic stopped in her tracks as she pressed down on the beautifully sculptured handrail with her right palm. She half-turned her body to face Jam and Sparrow and said at an adequate speed, "Rumor has it that the path leading to the forsaken land of the gods is hidden in the mountain across us, hidden in the shadows of the Giant King's Court. So Little Sun and company have begun exploring Afternoon Town. But didn't Little Jack mention that they appeared by the sea? The Giant King's Court and the shadow of the Giant King's Court must have switches in them. Only by opening them ahead of time can the two seas meet. This place is filled with the true creator's ravings, and it hides the secret of the forsaken land of the god. It has remnant powers of the Evernight, Sun, Storm, Earth, and Spectator pathway. This seems to correspond to the cataclysm. After the cataclysm, the forsaken land of the gods was isolated from the outside world. The goddess, eternal blazing sun, lord of storms, Earth Mother, and company saved the world while the true creator appeared. Only the Spectator pathway's imagination doesn't exactly add up. Klein made a guess based on whatever information he knew at hand. Queen Mystic continued walking down as she said, "The black cloister here doesn't appear big, but each building and every level represents a different part of these waters. Behind every door might hide the dream of a creature. I see." Klein glanced at the handrail and discovered that the sculpture on it was mainly that of a human's head. It was beautiful at a glance, but terrifying on careful inspection. Hence he asked in passing, "Whose dream does the staircase belong to?" "An undying from the numinous episcopate. He came here in search of death's remains, one of the main requirements of the artificial death. However, he lost control as a result of the ravings, and he's forever loitering in an underground ruin, turning every adventurer who dares to enter into becoming his zombie," Queen Mystic calmly explained. "Death was also involved in the battle of gods that happened here. It's no wonder Admiral Hell would take the risk and enter these waters from time to time." Klein felt enlightened. He wasn't alarmed about the matter regarding artificial death, as he had previously heard Demoness of Unaging Katerina Pele mention it before. Furthermore, the numinous episcopate seemed to be rather far from success. At this moment, just as Queen Mystic finished walking down the stairs, she turned to glance at him. Right on the heels of that, the lady turned into a corridor and entered a building. Klein surveyed the area and discovered that there was no longer any stairs leading downwards. They were apparently at the bottom level. Queen Mystic stopped in front of the black wooden door, filled with strange pattern. She gripped its handle and said, "I've always suspected that the dream within is the key to sustaining this place. The remnant powers of Evernight only provides the possibility of such a development." As she spoke, she twisted the handle and opened the door. The black door slowly moved backward, and behind it wasn't a room as Klein had imagined, but a sea. The sea was illuminated by blinding sunlight. The waves were huge swaths of rich gold. As the door opened, Klein felt an unimaginable aura seep out from inside. The entire building began to quake in an obvious manner as the dust and bricks on the wall began to fall. Subtly, Klein felt that the dream was on the brink of shattering. At this moment, Queen Mystic pulled her right hand, shutting the black wooden door tightly. Everything was restored to normal as a result of this. Even I do not dare enter, this mighty figure in the mysterious world said. This place has the dreams of certain remnant deities, Klein said calmly, as though he had someone backing him, allowing him to grasp the situation ahead of time. Queen Mystic turned around as her blue eyes swept over Jam and Sparrow's face. These waters and this black cloister hide a lot of secrets. My understanding of it might not even reach a single %. She didn't continue as she silently looked at Jam and Sparrow, as though waiting for something. What intense pressure, Klein thought for a moment and asked probingly, do you know the activation incantation of the Black Emperor card? Queen Mystic fell silent for a few seconds and shook her head. Klein looked her in the eye. Bernadette. The entire corridor turned so silent that even their breathing could be heard. Queen Mystic's lips moved a little before they pursed together. Her blue eyes temporarily lost their focus, but they quickly recovered their profundity. Queen Mystic turned around at an adequate speed, walked to the black staircase, and said without a change in tone, the dream is ending. Klein looked at her back, move up the black staircase, until the blinding light drowned out everything. Afternoon town. Upon seeing the candlelight light up in the buildings outside, the silent town seemed to come to life. Derek felt as though they had plummeted into a nightmare, as they instantly tensed up. Demon Hunter Colin observed for a while before solemnly saying, we are in the real world. The power of the altar has leaked out. Translator, Atlas Studios editor. Atlas Studios. That strange afternoon town has infiltrated the afternoon town in reality. Derek vaguely understood what the chief was saying as he had a rough guess as to why this had happened. He suspected that when Mr. Fool pulled him out of the strange afternoon town, he had broken an intricate balance, causing the powers to seep out. This also explained why Demon Hunter Colin Iliad didn't vanish immediately when he repeated the attempt. Just as Derek was wondering what kind of changes this would bring, the chief of the 6-member council, Colin, had taken out a luminescent powder from a pouch on his belt, and he scattered it in the air. The powder suddenly blasted apart, spewing silver light upward. It made it appear extremely obvious in such a dark environment. Derek, Haim, and Joshua knew very well what this signal meant. It meant not to run about haphazardly. Stay in your area, be wary against any incoming enemies, and await rescue. Without a doubt, this was a signal to all the other exploration teams scattered across Afternoon Town. Colin consecutively released the signal thrice in the span of 2 lightning bolts. Then he turned and said to Derek and company, we shall meet up with the rest by combing outwards. Be careful along the way. Yes, Chief. Derek had already forgotten the grievance from before, only wishing that he could help his partners as soon as possible. Following Colin's instructions, he took the left flank of the small team. On the other side was the red-gloved Joshua, who held an iron-black sword. Lining the back was the relatively stronger Dawn Paladin, Haim. And right in front was the Dawn Paladin, who was about 3 steps away. As lightning flashed at relatively fast intervals, the gloomy afternoon town would go from being bright to darkness. The candlelight from each window showed a wavering flame that burned in silence and calmness. Derek was no longer the fledgling he once was. Although he was nervous, his palm didn't sweat while holding the axe of Hurricane. He skillfully moved his gaze around, wary against any monster that might leap out from the buildings on both sides. After a flash of lightning, the world was thrown back into darkness. The bits of candlelight in Afternoon Town seemed to await travelers that needed lodging. As for the animal hide lantern in Haim's hand, its light scattered outward, but it failed to produce much light in a radius around it. It wasn't as effective as Derek's night vision. The only usage was that it appeared to dispel the rich darkness around them. At that moment, Derek suddenly felt a chill down his neck, but there wasn't any cold winds. He didn't turn his head subconsciously. Instead, he took 1 step diagonally, half-turned his body, and glanced through the corner of his eye. He saw the nearly 2.3-meter-tall Haim looking at him with a gloomy expression. He cleaved down with the broadsword in his hand. Bang! Derek somersaulted to dodge the strike, as he seemed to still hear the echoing sound of the intense wind. Following that, he heard the chief's voice. What happened? Haim attacked me. Derek rolled towards Colin's direction and stood up. Me? Haim held the animal hide lantern in one hand and his broadsword in the other, asking with a look of puzzlement. Colin glanced at Derek. I didn't discover any abnormality on his part. As he spoke, the demon hunter's eyes produced 2 dark green symbols. He surveyed the area and said, The attacker transformed its appearance to Haim. Before he finished his sentence, the silver sword that was clenched tightly in his right hand stabbed backward. Oof! Amidst the dull clashing sounds, a figure appeared in the dark environment. He had grizzled and disheveled hair, with deep wrinkles. He had weathered but profound blue eyes, and he held a silver sword with light gray oil slathered over it, looking identical to demon hunter Colin. The only difference was his gloomy expression and dark skin. Bam! 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 Two silver swords clashed in midair, sending sparks flying. Meanwhile, Colin Iliad shouted with a deep voice, "Light! Light!" Derek instinctively raised his hand and pressed them to his mouth and nose. At that instant, he discovered three figures dashing out from the surrounding darkness. One of them was the tall and muscular Haim, another the red-gloved Joshua, and the last one was a tall person with a childlike appearance, Derek himself. Derek wasn't thrown into a fluster. He acted in accordance with the chief's instruction and released lustrous brilliance from his body. The three figures seemed horrified of this, as they raised their palms to cover their faces while attempting to escape to the side. However, their speeds were in no way comparable to the speed of light. The lustrous brilliances illuminated the surroundings, enveloping the three figures within. They opened their mouths and let out silent screams, but they soon dimmed and vanished. As the light surged outwards, the two demon hunters were consumed by the light. The actions of one of them immediately turned stiff and was impeded before losing its color and turning completely black. Oof! The silver sword with light grayish oil slathered on it penetrated the monster, but it seemed to stab into air, failing to cause any actual damage. At this moment, the black monster suddenly immolated itself, cracking into distorted shadows as they corroded the light and flames, inch by inch. Colin retracted his silver sword and turned his head to Derek and company. The monsters this time are a shadow. Their weakness is the brightness of light. As he spoke, the chief's body produced a bright and holy light of dawn, illuminating the entire street as though it was day. This was a Beyonder power, a dawn paladin would receive from the warrior pathway. The reason why he didn't use it from the beginning was because the effects were obvious, and he had no idea what kind of accident it might bring. Now, he was already aware of the weaknesses of these monsters in Afternoon Town. The light of dawn produced by the chief was like a domain. Haim gave up his plans on using a similar Beyonder power. He continued holding up his animal hide lantern, and he followed behind Colin Iliad with Derek and Joshua as they turned into another street. Before long, the quartet arrived at a half-collapsed cathedral. The cathedral originally had a tower, and its entirety was made up of classical stone columns and masonry. They were heavy and dark. Passing through the door that even a giant would find wide, Derek followed the chief and came to the prayer hall. They saw the deity's statue destroyed, but the candle on the altar had been lit by some unknown entity. In front of the altar, a figure donning a Spartan white robe was prostrated there, praying so softly that no one could hear him. "He's not one of us." Haim, who also had night vision, was the first to discover the abnormality thanks to his height. "This means that it's not a monster that was transformed from our teammates' shadows." Derek helped Haim express the context between the lines inwardly. This meant an unknown, and an unknown often represented extreme danger. There should have been an exploration team here. Colin converged the range of his light of dawn to prevent himself from provoking the white-robed figure. Haim, Joshua, and Derek suddenly fell silent. Under such a situation, the absence of the exploration team's immediate appearance basically meant an undesirable outcome. Their minds raced as two men dressed in tight black clothes walked out from the right side of the hall. They were the two members of the exploration team at the cathedral. "Chief, those shadows are problematic." Leroy was swallowed by his own shadow. One of the teammates swiftly made his way to Colin and immediately said in agitation and fear, "Has someone already been sacrificed?" While Derek's heart sank, he saw the light of dawn expand, enveloping the two teammates within. The two of them suddenly wore ferocious expressions as their bodies rapidly darkened. Just 2 seconds later, they completely vanished like shadows that had been illuminated. Smack! 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 White bones and globs of bloody flesh fell from their bodies, smashing to the ground. Light slowly effused out of these mangled carcasses. Colin retracted his gaze as he said, without an expression, "Go to the side of the ecclesiastic and hear what it's reciting." Derek and company nodded in silence as they set off towards the collapsed statue. About 10 steps later, they discerned the white-robed figure's appearance from diagonally across. It was a crying middle-aged man with deep features. This ecclesiastic's face was nearly plastered to the ground as he muttered to himself, "Omnipotent Lord, I repent." Tempted Sasria. The kings often came to the palace belonging to the dusk to conspire. TT was unknown when the people in this town changed. They set up secret altars and held strange rituals, doing things you forbade. TT was already too late by the time I discovered all of this. Degeneration, bloodshed, darkness, rot, murders, corruption, and shadows had already drowned this piece of land. A huge calamity will begin here. These words kept repeating like a prophet describing the inevitable future with a heavy voice. A huge calamity will begin here. The abandonment from the Lord that created everything of this land. Is this where it began? Also, who tempted Dark Angel Sasria? This ecclesiastic should have stated who. It's because after he said the words, "I repent," there should have been a name, but it was blank. He had originally said it, but the name vanished by itself. Who wiped it away? This ecclesiastic should have been from that strange afternoon town. After the balance was broken, he appeared here. Otherwise, he should have been discovered on the previous exploration. Many thoughts flashed through his mind in a short span of time. At that moment, he saw the chief take a stride, walking to the side of the ecclesiastic in white. Klein woke up from his dream as the midday sunlight shone at his eyes from outside the window. He rolled out of bed, and he unhurriedly arrived at the pirates' dining hall. When Frank Lee saw his arrival, he immediately waved at him. "Gentlemen, I discovered something new." "FK, what now?" Klein immediately felt his heart in his mouth. "A new invention of yours." "No, it isn't." Frank shook his head in excitement. "I was planning on studying the fish in these waters. They will likely be able to dream. Just as I tried fishing, I ended up getting the strange item." Strange item. Klein instantly felt a headache, but he asked with an unperturbed expression, "What is it?" "Fish with human fingers growing in them." Without waiting for J.M. and Sparrow's reply, Frank ran into the dining hall. Before long, he ran back and held a strange bluish-black fish in his hand. The fish was of normal length. In the space where its eyes were, it had a face resembling a human. Its belly had been dissected, and 3 bloody fingers could be seen stuffed inside. TT wasn't inserted by me. It was originally like that. Look at its teeth. It's very unlikely that it will eat something like that, so it can only be the case of the fingers producing themselves. Of course, I'm currently unable to determine what the fingers will do to its body. Frank hurriedly explained his judgment. Klein glanced at the fish and said after some deliberation, "It might also be stuffed inside by someone." "Makes sense. Then it's not the most unique fish." Frank was stunned for a second as he appeared somewhat disappointed. "Fingers are considered flesh and blood. I'll ask Heath. He's an expert on such matters." As he spoke, he surveyed the area and found Heath Doyle, who was huddled in a corner eating. Frank quickly went over and placed the bluish-black fish before Bloodless. Heath Doyle extended his hand and pressed his face to the fish. Upon seeing this scene, Frank had a baffling feeling that something was amiss. He soon reacted and laughed. "No, this isn't food for you. You've been eating fish all this time, to the point that even your body smells of fish. What I meant was to ask if you know the fingers inside the fish's stomach. Can you find its original owner?" Heath Doyle stopped his leaning actions and carefully studied it for a few seconds. "They belong to a Rose Bishop's, at least a Rose Bishop's." He took out the 3 bloody fingers and stacked them together. After a brief moment, the fingers melted like wax, turning into a puddle of sticky flesh and blood. The flesh and blood squirmed as they drew a word in blood red: "Help." Fingers from a Rose Bishop. Help. Upon seeing this scene, Klein instantly made some connection. He recalled the Saint of Darkness and Leomester from the dream world. This Aurora Order saint was in a particular ruin, and he was affected by the remnant powers of an angel or deity of the spectator pathway, causing him to dissociate and transform into a kind character. This resulted in him being trapped there. His good and evil side constantly fought, often clashing at the psyche level. The main persona, which was more inclined towards the darkness, gradually held the advantage as the good personality hid everywhere in the mind world in search for help. Therefore, this is an attempt by Leomester's good side to call for help. As a saint of the Aurora Order, he might very well have advanced from a shepherd, so it's nothing strange to have the beyonder powers of a Rose Bishop. Klein nodded in thought, believing that his judgment was likely close to the truth. "Help! Help!" Frank Lee turned his head at Jam and Sparrow with a blank look. "You should ask your captain, not me." Klein shook his head. "You don't have to bother. There are too many oddities with these waters." The reason for giving this opinion was that, from the dream, Leomester's main persona held the absolute advantage. To really rescue him, he needed to make preparations to deal with a demigod. Although the good side would definitely interfere with it, all it could do was lower the Saint of Darkness's strength to a certain extent. It would still remain a demigod. Of course, with Queen Mystic on board the future, to make any actual attempts wasn't impossible. But if Leomester were so easily rescued and have him become a completely good Saint of Darkness, Klein believed that the Queen would have long done so. The reason why she didn't take action had to be because it was unrealistic. For example, the place where Leomester is at causes one's spirit to dissociate, so much so that Queen Mystic doesn't even dare challenge it. Leomester's dream was only partially restored. It nearly made me face a situation I couldn't deal with. Finally, I resolved the problem quickly with the Sea God Scepter. If I were to meet him in the real world, I'd really suffer a dissociation in personality, becoming a member of an asylum. I would have to find a way to borrow the mental terror candle from Father Atravsky to have a chance of being treated. Heh. I can also get Miss Justice to treat me, but she's still lacking in strength at the moment. Klein recalled the past as he jested inwardly. Yeah. Frank Lee trusted Jam and Sparrow a lot. Perhaps the fellow who's asking for help is long dead. Upon saying this, his eyes suddenly lit up as he stared at Heath Doyle. Can you wipe out the mental imprint left on this flesh and blood? Yes, Heath Doyle replied succinctly. The ends of Frank Lee's mouth cracked open bit by bit as he smiled like a 200-pound child. T have always been very curious about the flesh and blood structure of A. Rose Bishop. T have always thought of the outcome of using similar flesh and blood as the medium for crossbreeding. One day you will die amidst your experiments. Thankfully, I'll be leaving this ship soon. Klein had the baffling impression of a brattish child entering an armory. Heath Doyle, whose face was nearly translucent from the paleness, was taken aback for 2 seconds before sincerely saying, "Thank you." "Why thank me?" Frank Lee scratched his head, looking completely puzzled. "He's probably thanking you for being able to hold back your curiosity and not using his flesh and blood as the experimental subject. You are a partner worth trusting." The corners of Klein's mouth twitched a bit in an attempt to interpret the reason. He realized that the future's first and second mate had rather strange thought processes. Afternoon town. In the half-collapsed cathedral, Colin stood by the side of the ecclesiastic in white and softly asked, "Who are the king? What is the huge calamity? Who tempted Sasrier?" The ecclesiastic didn't seem to hear him, as he continued prostrating to the ground. He repeated his words of penitence, as though he was an illusory recording left behind by the environment. A wraith specter or an evil spirit. Derek looked in that direction, feeling somewhat nervous. Seeing no response from the ecclesiastic, Colin reached out his right hand, inching his silver sword towards the person. However, despite the sharp blade tip reaching the back of his head, the ecclesiastic remained in penitence, as though nothing had changed. Colin Iliad retracted his silver sword as he surveyed the area with dark green symbols in his eye. Then he walked diagonally to the altar ahead as he cast his gaze onto the candle emitting a yellow light. After a few seconds of silence, he reached out his left hand and extinguished the entirety of the candlelight. The collapsed deity statue in the middle of the altar suddenly turned dim as the prostrating white-robed man finally stopped his penitence. He slowly lifted his head. It was a gloomy green, and his gaze was filled with hatred. Before Derek, Haim, and Joshua could react in time, the devout ecclesiastic had pounced forward with an exceedingly fast speed, drawing out and after him. Colin was already prepared for it. He took a step diagonally forward with his right foot, turned his body halfway, and swept backward with the silver sword in his left hand. On the sword, spots of light soared, instantly forming a gigantic storm. The storm that was formed purely out of light swept the surroundings, leaving the ecclesiastic frozen in midair before he was completely devoured. The storm quickly came to an end, as Colin looked at the ecclesiastic whose body had been infused with the light of dawn. Then he repeated his previous questions again. "Who are the kings? What is the huge calamity? Who tempted Sasrier?" The ecclesiastic, whose figure was already very indistinct, replied in a dazed manner, "The kings are Sasrier, Ouroboros Medici, Just as he was about to say the fourth name, a transparent flame tore through him from the inside. The flame instantly engulfed him, burning him into a spreading black gas. So the kings refer to the kings of angels. What's the fourth name? Why did he self-destruct just as he was about to say it? Is it the one who tempted Sasria or someone else? Derek was filled with questions. As the ecclesiastic died, the streets outside and the entirety of Afternoon Town suddenly produced roars that sounded like wild beasts. Derek subconsciously looked out the window and saw a gigantic face. The glass where it was originally plastered had grown a single unique eye. On its face was short and dense black hair. Taboo, taboo, taboo. Another similar monster rushed out from inside the cathedral. It had the build of an ordinary human and 2 eyes, but the surface of its body was similarly covered with short black hair that resembled a beast's. A degenerate town that has been completely corrupted. Colin sighed as he faced one of the monsters. Derek, Haim, and Joshua also took up battle positions in a bid to fend off the remaining monster. The future continued cruising in peace before encountering a brief night once more. After Klein entered the dream world, he found himself back in his original position by Admiral of Stars Catlia's side. He was just about to look at the shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite side of the mountain to seek out more possible clues when he suddenly heard Catlia ask heavily while hugging her knee. "Have you met her?" Klein acknowledged tersely without hiding the truth. Catlia pursed her lips and asked, "She's on the ship." "Vesu." Klein turned his head and looked at Admiral of Stars as he said in passing, "You have very deep feelings for her." Catlia's expression wasn't as lost and dazed as before. Biting her lips, she said in a self-deprecating manner, "That's right. T was by her side before I was 3. Yeah. That's what they say, but I no longer have any actual memories of that. She taught me, and she held me by the hand as we adventured. She watched me grow up. To me, she's my captain and my teacher as well as my mother." As Catlia spoke, she suddenly fell silent. Upon glancing at the silent Catlia, Klein suddenly felt a little awkward. He didn't speak again as he turned and jumped off the boulder. He walked into the black cloister through the half-opened door. In the square surrounded by a gloomy tower and the buildings, there were remnant fires from a war. Gigantic arrows were embedded in the ground, with the end of their shafts softly wobbling from the wind. Frank Lee was still digging and planting something, but there wasn't food by his feet anymore, but a pool of flesh and blood. "What experiments do you plan on performing on them?" Klein, who walked past, couldn't help but ask. Frank smiled in excitement. "Plenty. For example, all I need is 1 ox that can satisfy the meat requirements of an entire ship. Every time a piece of meat is sliced off, it will regrow new flesh again." "Why is it oxen again?" Klein was momentarily unable to provide a response. All he could do was silently draw the crimson moon inwardly. Along the way, he encountered Navigator Adilov, who was reading on the ground, Nina, who was almost taking off her clothes due to her inebriation, Heath Doyle, who was hiding silently in the shadows of a corner, before arriving at the hall filled with murals. At some point in time, Anderson Hood had conjured a reclining chair and was leisurely lying on it, observing the extremely religious and holy murals on the dome. "Sigh, we're finally about to leave these cursed waters. It will just be another 2 noons and nights." Seeing Jam and Sparrow enter, the strongest hunter sighed from the bottom of his heart. "As long as we successfully leave this area, then I'll no longer need to worry about any remnant problem." Klein originally wished to ask him to shut up, but since he was talking about himself and no one else, he couldn't be bothered. He asked in passing, "Are you from Intes?" "Barely. My father is from Intes and my mother is from Segar," Anderson answered, with the full intention of having a chat. Klein continued, taking a few steps forward. "Then do you believe in the eternal blazing sun, god of steam and machinery, or the god of knowledge and wisdom?" Anderson's expression suddenly turned a little odd. "My faith was originally in the god of knowledge and wisdom, but their priests are too despicable. Just because I failed my examinations, they ignored my ordinarily handsome face and treated me as a red RD. Pui, I'm just better at other topics. My intelligence is in no way lacking. My eye for aesthetics and my basic foundation in drawing has always been excellent. Before becoming a hunter, my dream was to be an artist. Of course, after coming to the sea, my faith is more or less in the Lord of Storm." Upon hearing Anderson's description, Klein suddenly thought of a joke, A priest from the god of knowledge and wisdom might make such a statement. He failed his examination. This child is hopeless. Just bury him. He was about to lead the conversation into Anderson's life as a hunter, as he was the only person apart from Queen Mystic who could communicate with him normally in this dream world, when he suddenly heard the sound of a door creaking open. In the depths of the Hall of Murals, there was the sound of a door opening. Anderson just mentioned about successfully leaving these waters. Klein felt an inexplicable urge to facepalm himself as he focused his gaze on the source of the sound. Following that, he saw a man in a short linen robe running out from the depths of the Hall of Murals and towards them. The man had luxuriant raven-black hair, but he had wrinkles on his face, as though he had suffered plenty of hardship. Saint of Darkness Leomester. Leomester's good side. Klein recognized the man, and he immediately discovered a tall figure surface in the depths of the Hall of Mural. The figure was dressed in thick and heavy black full-body armor. His eyes emitted a deep redness. He held a huge sword as he chased after Leomester. Clang, clang, clang. His metallic boots hit the ground repeatedly, releasing clear and hurried sound. It's the real Leomester, the main persona of the Saint of Darkness. Klein saw the two approaching figures as he instinctively turned to the side and quickly retreated. He immediately held himself to the hall's wall before realizing that Anderson Hood had leaped up from his reclining chair at some point in time, clinging close to the other side of the wall. Sensing Jayaman Sparrow's gaze, Anderson grinned, returning a smile that meant, "So you are the same as me." "Who's the same as you?" "This isn't cowardice. If you weren't around, I would have taken out the Sea God Scepter and fought the Saint of Darkness. I've always been considering what would happen in the real world if I were to help the good Leomester kill the main persona in the dream. Yes, there are crew members from the future outside. If Leomester's main persona really goes mad, Queen Mystic will definitely take action. It shouldn't be a coincidence that these two fellows left their own dreams and came here. Both parties are already very close in the real world. Perhaps someone had directed the good Leomester over. Queen Mystic. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. Leomester, who was dressed in short linen robes, saw the two men ahead. He had wanted to cry for help, but in the blink of an eye, he discovered that the two of them had escaped to the two ends of the hall, as though they didn't wish to partake in any of this. T4. He desperately ran as he rushed out the Hall of Murals. The redness in the armored Leomester's eyes darkened. He continued his pursuit, completely ignoring Klein and Anderson, who were clinging close to the mural wall. By the time they left the hall, Klein, who had some theories in mind, didn't hesitate to take a stride forward and rush out like a hunting leopard. CC0 Anderson raised his right hand and grabbed at thin air, failing to stop Jayaman Sparrow in time. This guy was still rather rational a moment ago. Why did he suddenly go mad? He discovered something. What a strange person. Anderson looked at the square outside, hesitated a few seconds, and finally chose to follow. They chased all the way out the Black Cloister, and they arrived in the region where the Admiral of Stars was. Klein saw the linen-robed Leomester circling around the boulder to escape his evil counterpart. Then he took the opportunity and faced the shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite mountains, praying softly with ancient Hermes, "The Lord that created everything, you are omnipotent and omniscient." After making another circle, the good Leomester continued chanting, "You are the source of everything great. You are the beginning and the end. You are the God of gods. You are the ruler of the vast astral world." With the honorific name spoken, the sea of clouds that separated the two mountains suddenly stirred before slowly splitting apart and revealing a deep crevice at the bottom. The shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite side suddenly sucked up the frozen dusk that was extremely distant. However, nothing happened after that. Klein seemed to figure out something as he turned his head to look at the buildings near to the Black Cloister's door. He saw that, behind a clean floor-to-ceiling window, the beautiful but distant Queen Mystic Bernadette was watching everything that was happening in silence. She was indeed the one who made the good Leomester escape from his dream and arrive here, since a listener from the Aurora Order was able to bring little Jack into the forsaken land of the gods. It doesn't make sense that the Saint of Darkness isn't able to do so. When there's no path ahead, and with him seeing the shadow of the giant king's court, Leomester's split personality will definitely wish to escape into it. Hence, he demonstrated the way to enter the forsaken land of the gods to the person observing in secret. Klein retracted his gaze with great certainty. As for why Leomester didn't succeed, he believed it was because he wasn't in the right location. He needs to be deep in those waters, and he needs to find a particular spot that is surrounded by danger and strangeness. Then, only by chanting the honorific name of the City of Silver's creator in the dream brought about by the night, will the passage that's hidden in the shadow of the Giant King's court be opened. Following that, one can enter with the aid of a dream, bringing one's body and ship to transmigrate through the fog that mixes reality and illusion, so as to reach the shores of the forsaken land of the gods. Klein thought of certain possibilities. To him, the method of entering the forsaken land of the gods wasn't something he needed to care about. If he wished to do so, once he advanced to sequence 4 and truly obtained a certain level of godhood, he could get Little Sun to set up a descent or bestowment ritual for him to directly descend. However, if he used this to reverse engineer the way to leave the forsaken land of the gods, it would be extremely useful. This was priceless for the City of Silver. From the looks of it, the key to leaving the forsaken land of the gods is really in the Giant King's court. But as to what it is, there's no way of guessing it. Amidst his thoughts, pea vines rapidly grew out from the soil, instantly turning the area outside the Black Cloister into a green forest, and it also forcefully separated the Saint of Darkness's main persona and the good persona. Then Klein saw through the gaps of the pea vines that Katlia had stood up. She was no longer sitting there hugging her knee. Sizzle! Derek first did a roll before he jumped up, cleaving down at the giant's leg, which was covered in short black hair. Stimulated silver lightning smote down, causing the single-eyed monster to tremble as he stood rooted to the ground. Derek didn't miss this opportunity, as he immediately opened up his arms. Bright and pure holy light descended and enveloped the mutated giant. In the brilliance, the monster collapsed with a tragic cry as its body produced black fog. After a series of battles, Derek discovered that the monsters produced by the strange afternoon town were all afraid of intense light despite their different traits. Such an experience had allowed him to avoid injuries, allowing his teammates to keep their lives. After a while, when Colin finished the strongest monster, Afternoon Town was restored to its silence. All the lit candlelights were already extinguished. The chief of the 6-member council surveyed the area before saying with a sigh, "Let's regroup before we set up camp." At that moment, the teams that had gathered together had already been reduced to a third. There were only 6 people. Colin Iliad's true goal was actually the Giant King's court, but their encounter in Afternoon Town had made him realize that the exploration couldn't be done in haste. This was because the Giant King's court might hold deep secrets about the cataclysm, with unimaginable danger. Therefore, he needed half a year or more, perhaps even 2 years of preparation and preliminary explorations before he could attempt opening it. Layers of pea vines that appeared as though they were capable of weaving into a stairway into heaven dropped and shrank back into the soil. Be it the Saint of Darkness's main persona or Leomester's good side, they vanished. Only Katlia stood at the top of the boulder, surveying her surroundings with a blank look. Queen Mystic threw Leomester's mane, and Good sighed back into his own dream. Or did she pull them elsewhere in an attempt to understand the unique traits necessary for entering the forsaken land of the god? It seems like it's impossible to pull these 2 personalities into different dreams. Otherwise, Queen Mystic would have long conversed with the good Leomester individually, as well as agree to help him defeat the devil in exchange for relevant information, without going through so much trouble, of course, to truly kill off the Saint of Darkness's main persona. Perhaps one will have to enter the dangerous ruins in the real world. Even Queen Mystic wouldn't dare to attempt it, as it might produce an evil queen who abides by do as you wish, and do as much harm. Klein turned his head once again in thought, looking at the nearby buildings around the Black Cloister's door. He saw that the figure belonging to Bernadette had vanished behind the clear floor-ceiling window. Klein didn't attempt to seek her out to figure out if Queen Mystic had obtained more information from Leomester's good side. This was because he remembered Jamin Sparrow's core persona, Mr. Fool's Blessed. An Admiral of Stars knew very well that, in Mr. Fool's tarot gathering, the sun came from the City of Silver in the forsaken land of the god. Say that Mr. Fool didn't know the method of entering the forsaken land of the gods was unbelievable. Therefore, as a blessed, Jamin Sparrow definitely lacked the motivation to delve deep into the matter. There are many matters where the case is true that a persona which brings you success will also make you fail. This is a flaw for Faceless. Klein retracted his gaze and looked back at the shadow of the Giant King's court on the opposite mountain, only to realize that the frozen sunset was slowly returning to the horizon. On the same mountain, The boulder remained standing as Katlia slowly sat down again, hugging her knee. Noon and night switched thrice, but the actual amount of time that had passed in the outside world was just the daytime of a single day. The future circled around the dangerous ruins and dodged the latent dangers hidden in the safe sea routes, before finally arriving near the entrance of those waters. Klein and company once again saw the ruin, which was mostly submerged with seawater from the very beginning. They saw the gray stones and columns, as well as the huge dome at the top. Previously, they could hear loud and clear panting sound. Bloodless had even painfully pointed out that a corpse was hidden in those ruins, and that corpse was very likely to be the source of the panting. At that moment, the ruin that hid immense danger no longer brought fear to the people on board the Future, but joy. This was because it meant that they were about to leave the ridiculous and terrifying water. At some point in time, Nina had already climbed up to the tall crow's nest and said loudly as she looked at the ruin, "Hey, there's a ship." "Ship?" Klein circled around Anderson Hood, who was blocking him, and approached the shipboard as he focused. Indeed, on the right of the stacked stones and stone columns, there was an ordinary three-mast sailboat docked by it. As there was something in the way, it would be difficult for the people on board the Future to notice it if they weren't viewing it from a high vantage point or looking carefully. The sailboat floated there without a single sailor on board. The silence made it terrifying. It's as though it was all eaten by the ruin. Anderson came over and shook his head with a sigh. In these waters, one mustn't go close unless one knows the ruins well. A person who dares outline the mural of an angel of fate doesn't have the right to say that. Your treasure-hunting team claimed to be rich in experience. But in the end, aren't you the only one left from it? Klein didn't turn his head as he lampooned. At this moment, Katlia also came to the deck as she looked at the sailboat docked by the ruin. During this entire process, she didn't give Jam and Sparrow a glance. It was as though he didn't exist. After a brief moment of silence, Katlia raised her hand to remove the heavy glasses on her nose bridge. The deep purple hue in her eyes swirled, as though she was trying to outline one complex symbol after another. A pair of eyes suddenly appeared above the empty sailboat. They were a pair of illusory, translucent dark purple eyes. The pair of eyes slowly moved and circled the deck once before entering the cabin. This Beyonder power is very useful. Speaking of which, based on the means demonstrated by Queen Mystic and Admiral of Stars, the Beyonder powers of a mystery prior has some of the highlights of fairy tale. Man, will Queen Mystic be able to turn people into frogs? Also, is the mystery prying of a mystery prior demonstrated here, on their eye? Admiral of Stars' eyes are somewhat odd. I have to take note. Klein silently made a guess as he awaited the outcome of Katlia's remote exploration. After a while, the dark purple hue in Katlia's eyes finally dimmed. She rubbed her brows, wore her glasses again, and said to Anderson Hood and Frank Lee, "There's a problem inside." As she spoke, she took out a handful of colorful powder from her classic warlock robe, and she suddenly threw them outwards. The powder didn't scatter onto the ground, and instead formed a realistic color picture. The picture's background appeared like a captain's cabin. There was a picture on the desk and a portrait on the wall, both depicting the same person. He was a man from Fasak, with broad shoulders, light blonde hair, and deep blue eyes. Klein first found it familiar before he recalled where he had seen the man before. Back when he was in Nuz, an adventurer had been pursued by the second mate of the King of Immortality, Kirches, and ran into the Lurtle Bar to seek help from the members of the Adventurer Association. At that instant, among the powerhouses who stood up to provide protection was a muscular man from Fasak who was more than 2 meters tall. Klein had found him rather strong and placed him at sequence 6 at the very least. Why would his ship suddenly enter these waters, and why would he rashly explore a dangerous ruin? Amidst Klein's puzzlement, he carefully observed the supernatural picture on the deck. This time he saw a pool of blood on the floor, and beside the blood were a few words in Fasak, the fountain of unaging. The last character had a drawn-out mark of blood before it was connected to clear smudges that extended out towards the door. Klein's mind seemed capable of restoring the actual scene. The Sequence 6 Fasak man had suffered a sudden attack and fell to the ground, heavily injured. He tried his best to write down the source of his encounter, but just as finished the first few words, he was held by the legs or head by some unknown entity, and he was forcibly pulled away. Considering how the red words weren't wiped away, Klein suspected that the entity that dragged the adventurer away wasn't a living person. It should be the corpse of that ruin, he thought, feeling a headache. The fountain of unaging. They came here in search of the Fountain of Unaging, Anderson Hood said in excitement. Clearly, but they didn't find it. Frank Lee shook his head in great disappointment. He also looked forward to the Fountain of Unaging, believing that the fountain's waters could create qualitative changes to his various experiments. The Fountain of Unaging, Slaughter Kirches was the one chasing after the young adventurer back then. He's the second mate of the King of Immortality. Rumor has it that the King of Immortality had once drunk the waters of the Fountain of Unaging. Kirches even warned me, J.M. and Sparrow, to not interfere with the young adventurer's matters, claiming that it was the will of the King of Immortality. Klein barely reproduced the truth based on various tidbits of information. The young adventurer obtained the secret of the Fountain of Unaging from one of the King of Immortality's aides, and he was thus pursued. Later, with the protection of some of the stronger members of the Adventurer Association, he barely escaped from Slaughterer Kirche. Later, to hide from the King of Immortality, and also to seek out the Fountain of Unaging, they finally chose to adventure into these waters. Who knew that they ended up being wiped out in that ruin? Could it be that the Fountain of Unaging is hidden deep in that ruin? Klein looked at the stacked gray stones and stone columns as he vaguely made a prediction. As he temporarily had no way to verify his theory, nor did he know whose corpse was buried there, he didn't have the urge to explore or take risks. He rationally retracted his gaze. I can ask Will Ossipton or Arrows Head. Perhaps the Fountain of Unaging is the pus produced from that rotting corpse, Klein guessed with the most nefarious of thoughts. At this moment, Catlia, who heard Anderson's and Frank's conversation, thought and said, if their death was caused by their search for the Fountain of Unaging, I do not believe that the owner of the portrait and picture would have the motivation to leave behind accurate information before his death. After all, the people who actually find him here wouldn't be his family. Makes sense if I were in his shoes, and if I encounter a monster in my treasure-seeking adventures, I wouldn't think of providing any hints to others before my death. Klein indiscernibly shook his head, failing to think of any reason for the time being. Catlia looked at Anderson and Frank, who wore looks of anticipation. A successful adventure is a result of having detailed intel and sufficient preparation, but we lack all of that now. Her voice suddenly turned loud as it resounded in every corner of the ship. Continue sailing. Leave these waters. Aye, aye, Captain. Nina, who was on the crow's nest, gulped a mouthful of beer. A few minutes later, the descent and ascent that violated common sense happened once again, but the prepared members on the Future were no longer in a sorry state like before. They easily overcame the stimulating scene of jumping over the ravine and being sent flying. Soon the Future landed over blue seas, and a distance away was a gigantic storm blotting out the sky. Not far away, there was another ship floating there silently. It was 200 meters long, its front and back curved up, making it look like a crescent. Upon seeing the flag depicting the black tombstone, Klein's mind flashed with the corresponding name, the Death Announcer. It was the flagship of the King of Immortality, Agalito. At this moment, Klein no longer felt fear and horror, but excitement and agitation. With Queen Mystic on board, and with no need to hide this time, she, together with me, Admiral of Stars, Anderson Hood, and the crew of the Future will have the chance of wiping out the crew of the King of Immortality. Food for creeping hunger has been found. I've found a candidate for a marionette. At this moment, the Death Announcer suddenly turned around, moving away at an unprecedented speed. It fled, Klein instantly wore a blank look. Soon, the Death Announcer had vanished from his line of sight. That was way too fast. I just had the thought. Klein looked at the undulating surface of the sea, temporarily unable to gather his thoughts. Amidst his thoughts, he came up with a theory. King of Immortality Agalito's second mate, Slaughterer Kirches, is suspected to be a devil or even a desire apostle. He possesses the Beyonder powers to detect danger ahead of time, and the ability to lock onto the source of the danger. Then, would the King of Immortality be a sequence 4 demigod of the devil pathway to begin with? That's why once the crew of the Future possessed the actual strength to deal harm to him with an actual plan in mind, he immediately sensed the problem and discovered the existence of Queen Mystic, so he didn't hesitate to retreat. Yes, this means Queen Mystic also had the intention of taking action. Otherwise, my thoughts would have only made King of Immortality sneer and retaliate crazily. Sigh, this Beyonder power of the devil pathway is just too useful. Trying to ensnare the King of Immortality or his first mate, second mate, or third mate is quite impossible, Klein thought regretfully as he looked at Anderson Hood. The strongest hunter still showed a clear, warped expression, as though reeling in despair that his bad luck hadn't decreased. He was also surprised that the death announcer would flee with its tail between its legs, as though it wasn't going according to the script in his mind. He darted his eyes as he looked around with a guess, seemingly coming to a conclusion. Unfortunately, Anderson's bad luck isn't strong enough. Otherwise, he can be sacrificed in order to bait the king of immortality. Heh heh. Isn't that the correct usage of a provoker? Klein turned into the corridor and returned to his room. Just as he pushed open the wooden door, he saw a familiar back standing before his window. She had a very proportionate figure and was dressed slightly oddly. She was none other than Queen Mystic, Bernadette. "Ma'am, did your father not teach you? You shouldn't enter someone's room without permission, especially the room of a male stranger. As a lady who was brought up in a noble family, you should have been waiting by the door and earnestly request permission to enter. Emperor, didn't you recall the books on education?" Klein silently lampooned as he closed the door in passing. Without waiting for him to say a word, Bernadette said to him with her back facing him, "The matters from before have verified a theory of mine." "What theory?" Klein repressed his curiosity as he asked with a deadpan expression. Bernadette didn't turn her head as she looked out at the calm sea surface. "Aguilito's fountain of unaging is a scam. TF, there really is a fountain of unaging. It would have been one of the main ingredients of a demoness of unaging, or it would be something that would be produced from their corpses. Therefore, any man who claims to have drank from the fountain of unaging is lying." She didn't explain what a demoness of unaging was, seemingly certain that J.M. Sparrow knew what it was. And even if he didn't know, he would have the means of figuring it out later. Fountain of unaging, demoness of unaging, it does match. So the bloody text on that sailboat beside the ruin is to tell the world that the fountain of unaging is a scam. King of Immortality, Aguilito, has released news of the fountain of unaging again and again, in order to lure adventurers and pirates to enter dangerous waters and die, or to take the opportunity to slaughter them. It has strong vibes of a devil. It's no wonder Slaughterer Kirches warned me not to interfere. Klein thought for a few seconds and deliberately said in a ruminative tone, "Scam." Queen Mystic Bernadette nodded and said with a gentle tone, "This might be part of the ritual that Aguilito needs for his advancement to Sequence 4. It might also be an action needed to digest the Sequence 4 potion." She paused as though making a silent sigh. Then she said, "That's because the Sequence 4 of his pathway is demon." "Demon?" Sounds deceitful, creating a treasure scam to harm others. That does match the style of a demon. Klein was instantly enlightened. At this moment, Queen Mystic turned around as she cast her gaze through her checkered black veil and towards J.M. Sparrow's eye. "It's my turn to provide information." Klein deliberated for 2 seconds. According to the analysis of limited diary entries, Emperor Roselle suffered an extreme predicament in his later years. This forced him to come up with the idea of attempting something crazy. In this aspect, he was extremely frank. This was because the diary entries he had received up to date didn't reveal what Emperor Roselle wished to do in his later years, what predicament he was in, or what crazy action he did. Therefore, by providing this piece of information, he was hinting to Bernadette that to know the truth, she had to hand over the diary entries of Emperor Roselle's critical period to Admiral of Stars Cataly. Bernadette remained silent for a few seconds. As the dark clouds moved through the sky, allowing the sunlight to shine from the outside, the queen that reigned over the 5 seas suddenly dissociated like bubbles, shattering and disappearing. The light refracted from the bubbles had produced different colors, filling the room with a fairy tale-like dreamscape. If not for the hidden sage, the mystery prior pathway is really interesting, Klein reflected as he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice. He activated his vision of spirit body threads, but he didn't discover any additional black thread. This meant that Bernadette had already left. Phew, Klein silently sighed and quickly deactivated the vision. Just as he was about to lie in bed to take a rest, he heard brisk footsteps approach. Knock, knock, knock. Someone knocked at his door. "Who is it?" Klein sat up. "'Tis me." Catlia's voice sounded. Klein went over, feeling puzzled as he opened the door. He didn't ask what it was about as he coldly looked at her, his gaze expressing everything. Catlia nudged the heavy glasses on her nose bridge and said, "Coming out from those waters doesn't bring us back to where we enter. We are less than 100 nautical miles away from Toscarter Island. It will take about 3 days to Nuz. Where do you wish to return to? The entrance and exit are different. Klein was surprised as he asked in a confirming manner. Then, is it possible to enter those waters from this place? No, we will directly fall into that bottomless ravine of the ocean. According to the results of divination, the people who did so are dead in the true sense of the word, Katlia explained simply. Is that so? Klein thought before saying, to Tosgarder Island. The reason why he didn't choose Nuz was because they were close to the next tarot gathering. He didn't wish to do something that took plenty of time on the future. Furthermore, Tosgarder Island was the easternmost colony of the Lone Kingdom. The currency used was pence, solely and gold pound. Klein no longer needed to consider the problem of foreign exchange. All right. Katlia had no views on this. Watching her turn and walk to the captain's cabin, Klein shook his head slightly and sighed inwardly. If you had come earlier, you would have met Queen Mystic. In the evening, the future arrived at the port of Tosgarder Island as it forcefully docked there. Klein dressed up as a gentleman, carried his leather suitcase, and came to the deck. He then handed over the final payment placed in his 2 pockets to Admiral of Stars Catley. After subtracting the pugilist Bayonder characteristics worth £700, it was a total of £1,300. As such, Klein's wealth was reduced to £8,436 and 5 gold coins. Katlia received it in silence and opened her mouth as though she wanted to say something, but she ultimately didn't say a word. Are you getting off here, or are you going somewhere else? She turned to look at Anderson Hood. Realizing that Jayaman Sparrow was about to leave, and that he was on a pirate ship with him hunting several pirates in the past, Anderson immediately smiled. TL, get off here. You can now make payment. Katlia didn't spare him just because Anderson had borrowed clothes from the pirates. All right. Anderson didn't hide his heart-taking expression as he reached out and pulled off an ordinary button in the middle of his shirt. Reluctantly, he handed it over. This is what I acquired from those waters. It's from the corpse that originated from an explorer from the Lone Military. TM not sure of its original name, and I can only call it by its corresponding sequence 6 due to the powers it exhibits. Yes, Judge. Its negative effects aren't especially strong. It makes its wearer easily offend people or monsters. Perhaps one might end up being targeted by a demigod. This isn't something you can call not especially strong. If I were Admiral of Stars, I would have chosen that sword of yours, Klein lampooned as he watched Katlia receive Anderson's payment for the boat ride. He didn't bother with their affairs as he lifted his suitcase and left the future, arriving at the pier of Tosgarder Island. Bang! Anderson Hood leaped off the deck and landed beside him. Let's get some drinks to celebrate our departure from those cursed waters. The hunter invited him with excitement in a relaxed manner. Klein swept his glance at him, refusing his offer with his eye. All he wanted was to put a distance between him and this fellow who had bad luck and a provocative halo. All right. Anderson looked to his sides, cleared his throat, and said, Can you lend me money? As you know, everything that I had has sunken in those waters. Having said that, he laughed. Don't worry. I'll return what I owe tomorrow morning. There are plenty of pirates in Tosgarder's bars and brothels. I plan on getting them to sponsor me a little. Extort those without bounties while cashing out those with bounty. Klein tusked inwardly and handed him a 5 soldi note. That little, Anderson said with his mouth agape. It's enough for your drinks, meals, and hotel, Klein calmly replied. Besides, this is £1 in cash. £1. Anderson rubbed his eyes and said with a helpless smile. All right, it's £1. He'll return £1 to you tomorrow morning. Afraid that Jayaman Sparrow would go back on his word, Anderson grabbed the 5 soldi note as scenes of ordinary beef sizzling over flames and alcohol beverages, without any additional sedative surfaced in his mind. Well, this fellow actually accepted it. I was just saying it in passing in order to accentuate my persona, as well as to let him understand that it isn't so easy to borrow money from me so as to prevent him from hunting pirates and returning to the Fog Sea after borrowing a huge sum of money, Klein mumbled inwardly. To him, a Sequence 5 hunter wouldn't starve or have nowhere to stay when placed in a place with plenty of pirates, even if he didn't have a single penny. He indiscernibly shook his head and was about to leave the dock when he suddenly heard a boorish shout, Jayaman. 74. Upon hearing Frank Lee's voice, Klein shuddered as he turned around, his nerves taut. The first mate of the future, the poison expert with a 7,000-pound bounty, stood by the shipboard and held his hands to his mouth. As though broadcasting his voice, he asked, "Where will you be most of the time? Where should I write letters to? He wished to share with you the latest results of my research. I don't wish to know, this fellow probably doesn't have many friends. And I dare to be one of the many people he thinks of as friends but doesn't treat him as one. Yes, Admiral of Stars is still inclined towards Queen Mystic, and she lacks belonging to the Tarot Club. To openly develop a snitch at her side, no, a source of intelligence. It helps in my shock and awe tactic towards her, and it's a kind of jam and sparrow level punishment imposed on her. With this as a bedrock, it would be reasonable and natural for Mr. Fool to punish her. Klein's thoughts raced as he took out a notepad and fountain pen used for divinations from his pocket. He scribbled down the summoning ritual needed to summon his messenger, and he didn't forget to include the additional requirement of a gold coin. With a whoosh, Klein flicked his wrist, sending the note flying at Frank Lee like a dart, landing accurately in his hand. Excellent. Frank Lee glanced at the information on the piece of paper and waved his hand in delight. Klein didn't delay any further as he picked up his leather suitcase, left the dock, and began searching for a hotel. During this process, he was originally very adamant about objecting to Anderson's request to stay in the same hotel, but on second thought, he agreed to it. He was afraid that this fellow who was plagued with bad luck would get into trouble again, bringing about a disaster to the innocent guests and attendant. Therefore, he decided to monitor him up close and decisively handle the problem if required. After checking in, Anderson went into his room with his key. Bang! He sat down on a reclining chair, as though a heavy burden was released. After leaving those dangerous waters, he finally felt like he was human again. He didn't need to worry about suddenly dying. After he laid there silently for a while, Anderson Hood slowly got up. He took out a flask that had an outer lining made of iron, flipped over a glass cup, and poured himself some hot water. He believed that he should recollect himself and begin visiting the bars. After drinking some alcohol and filling his stomach, he could seek out some sponsor. After the hot water cooled a little, Anderson raised his cup and gulped it down comfortably. Suddenly, he coughed intensely as his face turned a little purple. Cough, cough, cough. Anderson reached for his throat, but he didn't seem capable of taking a single breath. With a crashing sound, the glass cup fell to the floor from his hand, shattering across the ground. Cough, cough, cough. Anderson's coughing weakened as his face turned purple. At that moment, his eyes seemed to produce a spark as the veins on the back of his hands squirmed like they were alive. Bang! Anderson fell to the ground, convulsing a little before becoming motionless. His breathing even seemed to come to a halt. Seconds later, the corpse-like Anderson suddenly got up as he rubbed his face in fear. Damn it, I almost choked to death from drinking water. TF, that really happened. Then I might be the hunter with the most laughable cause of death. Thankfully, I bought this item at great cost before entering those waters. It finally came in handy today. As he spoke, Anderson took out a doll formed of straw from a secret pocket in his vest. Ink was used to simply draw two eyes, a nose and a mouth. The doll's surface had already been corroded as pitch-black liquid dripped down, drop after drop. In about 8 seconds, it was completely reduced to a liquid, turning into a stain on the floor. My bad luck hasn't decreased at all, and it has even gotten worse, man. J.M. and Sparrow once told me of a prophecy, saying that the most lethal danger often lies in day-to-day life. Anderson paced about as he carefully avoided the glass fragments at his feet, afraid that it would cause him another death. No, I need to save myself. I need to save myself. Anderson pulled open the door and carefully walked out. He came straight to Klein's room, reached out his finger and rapped on the door. Soon the wooden door, which was neither too solid or hard, opened without a sound. J.M. and Sparrow, who had only taken off his coat, appeared before Anderson. Anderson forced a smile and said, "Are you pleasantly surprised?" Creak. The door closed right in front of him. See. He was first stunned before he muttered to himself with a stiff expression, "I should change the way I talk." Thump, thump, thump. He knocked on Klein's door again. The door quickly opened as a revolver was pointed at him. "Haha, I just wanted to ask if you know any Bayunders who can improve my luck." Anderson raised his hands midway, wildly hinting for J.M. and Sparrow to provide him with the details of the powerhouse that informed him of the prophecy. Too late. I've no idea where Queen Mystic is, eh? She didn't leave me a way to contact her. But since my messenger's summoning ritual is known to Frank Lee, it also means Admiral of Stars knows of it. And that means Bernadette knows of it. Also, after returning to Backland, I can seek out Miss Sharon's help. Queen Mystic is in her circles. Even though the frequency of her appearance isn't high, Klein gave Anderson Hood a look of pity. He wasn't fond of this strongest hunter, often mocking him inwardly and expressing all kinds of nefarious thoughts towards him. After all, Anderson was partially responsible for him losing his cufflink. However, it was only limited to his thoughts. He had no intentions of actually putting it into practice. If Anderson truly sought his help, he similarly wouldn't reject him. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "I can help you ask, and I'll give you the answer tomorrow morning. But I suspect you don't have the means to pay me. TL go make my rounds at the bars later. Furthermore, I have plenty of stashes in the Fog Sea," Anderson replied without hesitation. Klein nodded, and as he closed the door he said, "Meet you tomorrow morning. I hope you can survive until then." Krieg. The door was locked once again. "TS that a curse, or was he wishing me luck?" Anderson whispered with a wry smile. "According to my experience, there probably wouldn't be any accidents in the next 2 to 3 days." Inside the room, Klein returned to his desk. On it was a letter that already had the introduction written, as well as an unfolded paper crane. In regards to Anderson's problem, Klein had already thought of a target to ask before he even agreed. There was no doubt that to resolve the means of a snake of fate, questioning another snake of fate was the best solution. He pondered over the space that was available after unfolding the paper crane, and the questions he would like to ask before writing a draft in his mind. Finally, he raised his pencil and wrote, "How should the bad luck curse from an Angel of Fate mural be removed? What's the name of the sequence 4 potion for the seer pathway? Where can the formula and main ingredients be obtained?" Putting down the pencil, Klein carefully scrutinized the questions before carefully folding the paper crane according to the folds and placing it in his wallet. After doing all of this, he continued writing to Mr. Azek. In the letter, Klein first mentioned that he received the help of Admiral of Stars in entering the dangerous easternmost front of the Sanya Sea, successfully completed the ritual, and, changing gears, he mentioned his encounter with Admiral Hell Ludwell's inexplicable attack mid-journey and how he nearly suffered terrible losses. While on this topic, he began describing the ring on Admiral Hell's hand, which was suspected to be a relic from ancient death. He asked very subtly if Mr. Azek had any recollection of it, or if he needed to obtain it to study it, so as to invoke more memory. After mentioning this, Klein mentioned in a casual manner about the artificial death project by the numinous episcopate, as well as asking this big shot if it was feasible, or if there were any records that recorded the actual detail. Finally, he mentioned how he didn't know the subsequent sequences of his pathway, and he didn't know how to obtain those opportunities. Klein began providing a description of the summary of things to take note of from traveling through those dangerous waters. This was to provide Mr. Azek information, so as to prevent him from suddenly wishing to seek out the remnant aura of ancient death, without realizing the lurking danger. Rumor has it that those waters are filled with the ravings of the true creator. The higher the sequence, the clearer one will hear it, making it easier to be influenced and resulting in madness or a loss of control. This is demarcated by sequence 4, but a small number of demigods have found the means to act freely there, Klein wrote at the end of his letter. After folding the paper, he picked up Azek's copper whistle and summoned the huge skeleton messenger. The messenger burrowed out from the ground and politely looked at Klein from a level height before opening his palm. "Not bad," Klein praised silently and handed the letter over. Then he brushed his teeth and took a bath before comfortably getting into bed. After an unknown period of time, he found himself awake in a dream, and he saw the desolate plains and pitch-black steeple. Familiarly walking into the depths of the steeple, Klein discovered Will Ossipton's reply among the scattered tarot cards. Friendly reminder, the paper crane is about to tear. The bad luck curse brought about by the mural can be resolved by Rixire. High-sequence formulas for the seer pathway can only be obtained from the crazy Zaratol or the Hornisus mountain range. If you are the blessed of the Evernight, treat it as though I didn't say it. Sequence 4 of the seer pathway is Arcane Sorcerer. Transaction Bizarro Sorcerer. Klein suddenly woke up from his dream as he opened his eyes to see the dark night. It's not noon yet. It's still very dangerous. he mumbled before returning back to sleep. At this moment, he finally recalled that he had already left those dangerous waters. He wouldn't vanish or go missing if he wasn't sleeping at the end of the night. Phew, it's this kind of stable environment that's good. I have to say that mysteriously vanishing due to not sleeping after dark is something that can be used to scare kids, making them not dare to sleep late. Heh, I was often scared by such stories when I was young. Klein sat up, walked to the desk, and poured himself a cup of water. After a moment of silence, he gulped down a mouthful of water as he gradually recovered his ability to think. Zeratul really went mad. What exactly did he encounter, or what happened to him, Bizarro Sorcerer? Sequence 4 is called Bizarro Sorcerer. The Seer Pathway's main focus is on being tricky, crafty, pranky, and paranormal. Or should it directly be summarized as being bizarre? Yes, clown, magician, faceless, and marionnettist do give me such a feeling. Seer appears to be an exception, but in the eyes of others, the style of a charlatan might appear rather strange and terrifying at times. That's why Zeratul said that fate isn't the main domain of this pathway. Also, it's clear that Beyonders of this pathway are more inclined to being spellcaster. According to Will Ossipton's explanation, there are 3 methods to obtaining the potion formula to Bizarro Sorcerer. 1. Seek out the secret order and find the mad Zeratul. 2. Head to the main peak of the Hornisus mountain range and find the treasures left behind by the Antigonus family. 3. Obtain it from the church. For example, that Antigonus family's notebook might contain the corresponding formula. But each one of these 3 options is more dangerous than the other. According to Emperor Rosel's description, Zeratul was a Sequence 2 miracle invoker a long time ago, a true angel. Later, he even advanced to Sequence 1. He's equal or slightly weaker than a king of angels. The crazy him might have gone mad, but it's likely that he will be more difficult to deal with. At the very least, there's no possibility of me convincing or tricking him. Even in terms of pure strength, I wouldn't be Zeratul's match even if I employed Mr. Azek's help. Heh, unless I wait for Will Ossipton to be born, but if he were to involve himself in this matter, there's a small chance of him incurring the attention of Angel of Fate Ouroboros. As for the treasure on the main peak of the Hornisus mountain range, the resounding ravings, the setup of the Antigonus family, and the rumors of the nation of the Evernight buried in the depths of mystery, they make me feel that it isn't a simple matter. I suspect it's likely to be a trap. I don't even need to consider the church of the goddess. Ignoring the fact that the Holy Cathedral has angels presiding over it, as well as a bunch of Grade 0 sealed artifacts, just the Backland diocese where the Antigonus family's notebook has a terrifying demigod. Klein couldn't help but recall Mr. A, who had been erased like a pencil drawn. And the one that executed all of that was likely to be one of the upper echelons of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. A beautiful lady whose eyes lacked spirituality, she even smiled at me. I've no idea what it means. Klein shook his head in resignation, believing that he only had one course of action that he had at present. That was to find a demigod from the secret order who was still considered normal. Compared to the mad Zeratul, I can communicate with them at least, or even deal with them. Just Klein alone was impossible, but he could seek Mr. Azek's help or Queen Mystic Bernadette's help at a certain price. I can only consider this for now. Klein rapidly turned his thoughts back on how to help Anderson Hood rid the bad luck curse. It's been more than 2 months. I wonder if Fate Counselor Rixardo has left Oravi Island. He hasn't summoned my messenger all this time to inform me of clues to the mystical item I seek. However, it's not a big problem. Bellman Carnot definitely hasn't left his post. I can contact Counselor Rixardo through him. That's good too. The Life School of Thought hasn't completed the request up to now, meaning that they haven't made their final payment. They can pay it off by changing Anderson's luck for the better, then I can receive the payment from Anderson. When it comes to a mystical item or sealed artifact which possesses immense offensive powers, isn't Anderson's sword one? According to the traits showcased by Reaper, I can ignore the item formed after he dies. I'm not some greedy demon either. I'll definitely pay additional fees to tide him over. Klein wiped away his mischievous thoughts and took out the paper crane from his wallet. After unfolding it, he carefully erased the pencil marks on it. It's really about to tear. I can use it another 2 times at best, he muttered sadly. Then he folded the paper crane and returned to his bed to continue sleeping. As for using the radio transceiver to contact Arrows, He planned on doing so after leaving this pirate's playground. After daybreak, Klein languidly got up and slowly washed up, believing that this was how life should be. Thump, thump, thump. The knocking on the door interrupted his state of wistfulness. Without his acumen for danger, his spiritual intuition told him that it was Anderson Hood. As expected of the strongest hunter, he successfully survived up to now. Klein tisked and controlled his expressions before opening the door. Anderson was wearing a deer hunting cap of unknown origin. He grinned as he handed him a lone gold coin. "What I owe you from yesterday." Klein received the gold coin and measured its weight in his hand. "There's an answer to your problem." Anderson's eyes lit up. "What's the solution?" "Don't tell me that the answer is that there are no solutions. Am I such a person? I'll just say that it's hopeless, so just wait for your death." "Goodbye," Klein lampooned as he swept Anderson with an indifferent gaze. "A demigod that's good at changing one's luck stays in Oravi Island. He owes me a favor." "Excellent." Anderson didn't hide his joy. "So what sort of payment must I make?" "Very sensible of you." Klein deliberately fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, "I need a mystical item with powerful offensive ability. Do you have any clues?" "TF, the value exceeds that of the luck enhancement ritual. I will pay the difference." Anderson frowned bit by bit before easing them. He said with a smile, "I have a mystical item that matches your request. It has a Beyonder power that can deal lethal damage. The negative effects aren't bad either. You will still be able to eat and sleep while having some bad luck, easily attracting monsters and enemies. Occasionally, you will be talkative and be a little off-putting." "Haha, it's a joke. To be frank, my death bracketon is the mystical item you need, but it's the only weapon I have left. I do have one relevant clue. It's a rather special revolver. The bullets it shoots have the effects of weakness attack, lethal attack, and a slaughtering effect. Furthermore, it can be matched with bullets of different characteristics. The negative effects include developing a weakness that originally didn't exist after every use, such as the fear of light, the fear of ships, the fear of dogs, etc. And such a weakness will last for 6 hours. There's almost no negative effects when having it on you. It just makes you easily thirsty. This is something completely tolerable. If not for the characteristics of the revolver overlapping with my abilities and the mystical items I have, then I would have bought it back then. The seller is offering it for £9,000. So the total price would be £1,500 and the clues to the revolver. How about that? Sounds very suitable. Besides, it fits my combat habits." Klein didn't directly agree as he asked in return, £1,500. "Haha, I found more than 10 pirates yesterday. They were all very kind, contributing all their wallets to me. Otherwise, they would lend me their characteristics and heads. In just one night, I received £1,600. Seriously, I love this pirate's paradise." Anderson said with a beaming smile, "I have to keep £100 for myself for the ship tickets to return to the Fog Sea. So all I can do is pay you £1,500, earning £1,600 a night. Not only are there many pirates in Toscardar, but they are either worth a lot or have plenty of money." Klein suddenly had thoughts about staying a few more nights in the port city. But considering how the easily cacheable and locatable targets had mostly been finished off by Anderson, what was left was definitely not easy. He felt depressed again as he coldly asked, "Aren't you afraid of being a target of revenge for doing something like that in a pirate's playground?" "What's there to worry about? I'm not afraid, even if they're subordinates of a pirate admiral." "Heh, I believe you're the same. If they're men of the Four Kings, that's not a big problem either. We're about to leave, and the propagation of information takes time. By the time they come, I'd have changed ships and identities several times." Anderson said without much concern. "Why are you cursing yourself again?" Klein silently swept him a look of pity. "Deal. Haha, here's £300. You'll have to wait for the remaining £200. That's when the bounty rewards and characteristic money arrive. Don't worry, it will definitely come today. It's not a lot." Anderson took out a thick wallet filled with plenty of Soli bills and handed them to Klein. In consideration of his persona, Klein only did a simple count before stuffing the cash into his wallet and pockets. He said without emotion, "Buy 2 tickets to Oravi for tomorrow." He didn't deliberately exhort Anderson to buy them with a different identity, as he believed that the hunter across him was mature and experienced. If he's lacking in experience and strength, with the way he does things, he would have long been buried in some sea. Klein couldn't help but lampoon inwardly. "All right." Anderson pointed at the floor. "Breakfast together." "My treat." Klein nodded without refusing him. Once they arrived downstairs, the two sat at a table near the window. Midway, a waiter brought white porcelain cups and teaspoons over. Just as they interacted, the waiter's gaze suddenly turned adrift. He picked up the teaspoon and stabbed it at Anderson's throat without any warning. Although Anderson was surprised, his reaction was in no way slow. He immediately leaned backward and dodged the sudden strike. Bang! Not far away, the hotel's boss suddenly shot at Anderson's dodging body. What am I doing?" After the gunshot, the boss muttered with a look of alarm and blankness. Ground amidst the gunshot, Anderson's body suddenly collapsed to the floor, using an amusing manner to dodge the bullet. As for Klein, who didn't fully understand the situation, he jumped to the side and activated his spirit vision while pulling out his revolver. At that instant, his first reaction was that Anderson had gone overboard in his hunting last night and was now the target of revenge. He only wished to shout, "I don't know him. It has nothing to do with me." At the table beside Anderson Hood, a stout man dressed in a shirt with rolled-up sleeves threw forks and knife, and he suddenly drew an already loaded double-barreled hunting rifle, aimed at the ground, and pulled the trigger from a commanding height. These series of actions were nearly simultaneous with the hotel's boss, but they were simply one step slower due to the many steps involved. Bang! The scattershot sprayed out countless tiny shrapnel, riddling the ground with holes. Although Anderson had dodged in time and avoided most of the blast, he was still struck by a portion of the shrapnel as his sides were immediately left mangled. Just as Klein was about to kill the stout man with the double-barreled hunting rifle to help Anderson Hood get out of danger, he realized that the man suddenly turned blank, just like the hotel's boss. He was then filled with alarm and horror, as though he had jolted out of his stupor. "That's not right. They're not the true assailants." Klein rationally stopped attempting to pull the trigger. He quickly swept his gaze across the restaurant. Discovering nothing with his spirit vision, he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice, activating his spirit body thread's vision. At this moment, all the ladies and gentlemen in the restaurant had stood up in a fluster due to the sudden shootout. All of them were rushing for the exit. When passing by the tumbling Anderson, an elegantly dressed lady with pretty good looks suddenly paused. She released the dark-colored glass bottle she held in her hand and poured it at the strongest hunter. Sizzle! Anything that was splashed by the liquid rapidly turned black as it suffered intense corrosion. Anderson covered his face and leaped up, dodging this attack once again. Immediately following that, a gentle and cute lady, a gentleman with newspapers, a red-vested waiter, and a 5-year-old child whose hands were stained with sweets attacked Anderson Hood in all kinds of manners. Flour, lit matchsticks, fruit knives, boiling coffee, and concentrated alcohol beverages inundated him as almost everyone in the hotel's restaurant seemed to have one goal: kill Anderson Hood. In this abnormally dangerous situation without any Beyonder powers involved, Anderson, who had been surrounded with no way to escape, employed an array of actions, leaping up, sending tables flying, igniting items ahead of time, barely managing to avoid suffering damage to any vital spot, and didn't suffer any serious damage. Meanwhile, Klein also noticed something abnormal. In a corner of the restaurant which was blocked by a decorative cabinet, there was clearly thin, illusory black spirit body threads extending from it, but it was silent over there. In this chaotic and panic-stricken restaurant, it appeared especially abnormal. The true assailant who planned the passers-by murder case is sitting over there. From the confusion, puzzlement, horror, and fluster that the hotel's boss, waiters, and guests exhibited after attacking Anderson, they didn't become marionettes. This is another kind of control, an illusion, an emotion seed of a desire apostle, or could it be an influence on one's psyche? Klein suddenly had an idea light up in his mind. He immediately took 2 steps forward and sent a customer who still had butter on the corner of his lips flying, opening up a pathway for Anderson Hood. The strongest hunter immediately somersaulted out of the encirclement via the path that was opened up, and he ran up to the hotel's 2nd floor. Then, with his back to the wall on the corner of the staircase, he gasped for air. Has my provocative powers reached this level? Even the ordinary residents that I don't know wish to kill me, and have actually rose to arms. Man, just as he spoke, Anderson pulled his right rib and nearly cried out in pain. No, no, no. The real circumstance is that a person plagued with bad luck shouldn't do things like hunt pirates. The reason why Klein had abandoned approaching the target to attempt to control them with spirit body threads was because he had thought of a possibility. The passers-by were implanted with psychological cues or had suffered manipulation on the psyche level. Only then would they attack Anderson in an orderly fashion. This didn't match the Beyonder powers of a desire apostle, as the attacks by the manipulated passers-by were targeted and precise, without showing any observed signs of preparation. And Klein had formerly heard of the name of the potion formula of a sequence 4, manipulator. In addition, according to the psychiatrist released from creeping hunger, Klein always suspected that Toscarter Island had a mission or figure related to the psychology alchemists. In addition to the psychological cue and the control on the left side of the mind, it was rather similar to that of the spectator pathway. Klein had long believed that a manipulator very likely belonged to the spectator or dragon pathway, thus making the outline of the matter relatively clear. Psychology alchemists really does have an important base in Toscarter Island. They also sent a sequence 4 demigod go watch over. This demigod influences certain pirates and makes them unknowingly do his bidding, but these pirates had unfortunately ended up as Anderson Hood's sponsors last night. Hence, their true investor came knocking. Keeping his expressions in check, Klein looked at Anderson and indifferently said to him, "It's likely that one or several of the pirates from last night is involved with a hidden demigod on this island. Do you think something like that can be done by a mid-sequence Beyonder? He can't be that unlucky, right?" Anderson's voice grew softer before it turned into a mutter. "Indeed, those people were controlled and are innocent. Thankfully, I didn't attack back, or I would become the main suspect of a shocking murder case and be given a bounty. When that happens, I'll be in trouble and could only become a pirate." See. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched slightly. The ones being controlled had been pirates with Beyonder powers, or mandated punishers or priests of the Church of Storms. How would it develop? T would already be dead. Anderson threw up his hands as he said in realization, "You mean he doesn't want me dead and only wants to give me a warning?" Klein nodded in a serious manner and said, "So, you still have a chance." "Yes, to apologize. Go see what that demigod is up to." "Apologize?" Anderson's face wrinkled immediately. Placed in a difficult position, he said with great difficulty, "I have quite a reputation in the fog sea." Klein didn't say a thing. He stood up, patted his coat, and prepared to walk off. At this moment, Anderson lunged forward and rushed to the entrance of the staircase ahead of Klein. He yelled, "I'm sorry. It was my fault. We can talk about anything." He paused for a second and repeated again, "I'm sorry. It was my fault. We can talk about anything." Clap, clap, clap. A series of slow claps sounded on the first floor as a figure appeared at the staircase. Amidst the light footsteps, this figure slowly walked to the bend, but Klein instinctively moved his gaze away as though he didn't wish to know what that person looked like. In addition, he realized that he didn't have any intentions of raising his arms or aiming his gun. It was as though he had been cued and had lost the intention of resisting. This is terrifying. Yes, it's not a face-to-face hypnosis, which is why I could detect. But if I was directly targeted, the repercussions would be unimaginable. I can be influenced now. In the way Miss Justice would explain it, the other party will use the sea of collective subconscious to silently arrive beside my island of consciousness, and then they would do something to a certain extent. Klein came to a realization, as he had the sudden urge to leave and return to his room. This is the silent instruction given to me by the demigod. Klein roughly understood that the other party wished to communicate with Anderson in private, hence, he didn't resist and walked to the stairs before returning to his room. In less than 5 minutes, Anderson knocked on his door, his face grimacing. "Done talking?" Klein asked without much surprise. Anderson gave a heavy nod. "Phew, yes, he got me to help him do something. As for what is it, I can't tell others." "Do you still remember what he looks like?" Klein deliberately asked. Anderson thought carefully as he suddenly frowned. "I don't remember, as expected, look at you. For 1,600 pounds, you offended a demigod. It wasn't worth it at all." Klein silently sighed and then said, "Can we leave tomorrow?" "Yes. There's no rush for that matter. Let's resolve the problem with my bad luck first." Anderson didn't hesitate to answer. Klein didn't speak further as he pointed at the floor. Still having breakfast? Anderson was first taken aback before revealing a smile. Of course. No type of frustration can influence eating and sleeping. The two went down to the first floor and discovered that the waiter was silently clearing up the shattered item. The boss and the customers had all forgotten what had happened. After breakfast, Anderson continued going out, busy obtaining his bounty rewards and Beyonder characteristics money. He also did some preparations while Klein stayed in his hotel room, converging the spirituality that overflowed from his advancement and using worms to test his Mariontist Beyonder power. At 2:30 in the afternoon, he went above the gray fog ahead of time and began practicing for the upcoming tarot gathering. After all, Mr. Fool would very casually and lightly punish the hermit catalyst. Sitting in the chair belonging to the Fool, Klein began playing out the 3 punishment plans he had decided over the past few days. 2 of the plans needed him to borrow some of the power of this space, and 2 of them needed to use props. Hence, he needed to decide on the entire process ahead of time. He would then familiarize himself with it, and he couldn't reveal his lack of fluency at the critical moment. After an unknown period of time, Klein exhaled and confirmed his plan. Then he conjured the world. Without any items, he saw the countless dense black threads that emanated from his body. Items conjured using the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog possess a certain amount of spirituality, so they come equipped with spirit body thread. And in the real world, items without life do not have any. Klein familiarly controlled the black threads and quickly completely controlled the world. Now, not only could he make the world's expressions more intricate and have reactions that were more like a real person, he could also make the marionette's spirituality fluctuations become more natural. It wouldn't appear as lifeless anymore. Apart from that, he was like a player who had 2 accounts, gaining the world's vision, hearing, as well as his other senses. After completing all of this, Klein glanced at his golden pocket watch, sent Little Son a message, and began to silently count his heartbeats.